Mr. Colton, this notice is your final opportunity to bring Unit 4B into compliance with community aesthetic standards before we escalate to legal action. That sentence came on HOA letterhead, signed by one Diane Pressler, president of the Millbrook Ridge Homeowners Association. And it was addressed to me about a building she had no more legal authority over than she had over the county courthouse. What Diane did not know, what she had never once bothered to verify in 6 years of sending certified letters, filing nuisance complaints, and calling my tenants on their personal cell phones, was that my building sat on a C2 commercially zoned parcel that the HOA's own founding covenants, recorded with Harlan County in 2008, explicitly excluded from their jurisdiction. Every notice, every complaint, every pressure campaign she had run against my tenants and my property had been constructed on a document she had never read. I had a copy of that document. I also had 11 of her letters, 4 of my written responses, 1 code enforcement inspection report, 2 signed tenant statements, and a board memo authored by Diane herself that had ended up in my possession through the conscience of a woman who could not stay quiet any longer. All of it was in a binder, numbered, dated, and tabbed. So here is what I want to know before I get into the full story. If someone with a clipboard and a pearl necklace told you to submit to their authority over property they had no legal claim to, what would you have done? My name is Ray Colton. I am 58 years old, and I have been in commercial construction and property management for going on 35 years. I spent the first 22 of those years as a licensed general contractor, running crews on small and mid-sized commercial builds throughout the Western Virginia region before I shifted into owning and managing my own portfolio of income properties. I carry 4 buildings now in and around Millbrook Ridge, Virginia, and the one that matters to this story is 44 Crestline Avenue, a 3-story dark brick building with 12 residential units on the upper 2 floors and 2 commercial spaces on the ground floor. Wide sill windows, heavy mortar joints, a lobby with black and white hex tile that my wife Lena chose over my objection in 2017, and that I have never once looked at without thinking she was right. We found the building in a Harlan County foreclosure listing in the winter of 2016. The asking price was thin because the prior owner had deferred maintenance across every system for a decade and a half, and the county wanted the property off its books. Lena saw something in it that I was slower to see. We drove out to look at it twice, and then she asked me to drive out a 3rd time. And when we were standing in that lobby with the tile cracked in 3 places and the lobby light fixture loose on one side, she looked at me and said, "Ray, this is the one." When Lena said things that way, 19 years of marriage had taught me to start filling out the offer sheet. We closed in March of 2017 for $412,000. We spent the following 8 months and a significant portion of our savings rehabilitating every unit, replacing the plumbing stacks on the 2nd floor, rewiring the ground floor commercial spaces to handle small business loads, resurfacing the parking lot, and arguing about the lobby tile, which Lena won handily by presenting me with a sample she had already ordered. She also selected the paint colors for the hallways, drafted the tenant screening criteria that I thought were too patient, and that turned out to produce a better quality of long-term tenant than my instinct would have, and organized the first set of labeled maintenance folders for the building, 1 per unit, stored in a standing rack in the utility room. She set up a backup drive for digital records the same week. If any of that sounds familiar, it should. Part of what I had learned in 22 years of construction was that the job does not end at the certificate of occupancy. It ends when the records are filed and the files are organized, and you know exactly where to find anything you might need to defend yourself in 3 years when someone claims you owe them something you do not owe them. I had seen contractors lose disputes over work they had done correctly because their paperwork was scattered. I had seen property owners lose easement fights because they could not produce the original survey. The folder habit was not something I started because of Diane. I started it the first time I signed a construction contract, and a lawyer told me to treat every project as though someone was going to sue me over it someday. Most of the time, nobody does. But the folders exist either way. And the ones that exist are the ones that matter when someone tries to tell you your building is not your building. I had folders on all 4 properties before Diane Pressler knew my name. Lena was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in January of 2020. She passed away 14 months later, in the last week of March 2021. Our daughter Cassie was 13 when her mother died, and is 16 now, and lives with me in the house 3 miles from Crestline. 44 Crestline Avenue was the last project Lena ever picked, and the one we put the most of ourselves into. And Cassie understands this the way a kid understands something that has been shown to her rather than explained. We do not sell it. That decision was made the week Lena passed, and nothing about this story changed it. The Millbrook Ridge Homeowners Association was formed in 2008 as the governing body for the residential subdivision that begins 2 blocks east of Crestline Avenue, on the far side of a tree line and a drainage easement that the county's engineering office had surveyed and recorded in 1992. The subdivision encompassed roughly 400 single-family homes and a cluster of townhouse parcels. The HOA's governing covenants, filed with the Harlan County Recorder in August of 2008, were standard language for a residential association of that size. The authority covered parcels within the platted boundaries of the Millbrook Ridge subdivision, and the covenants contained explicit language on page 4 of the recorded document, stating that commercially zoned parcels as a class were excluded from association governance. 44 Crestline Avenue had carried a C2 commercial and mixed-use zoning designation since a 1994 county rezoning action, 23 years before I bought it. The parcel had never appeared in any residential plat. The drainage easement functioned as a hard legal boundary line between the subdivision and the commercial corridor along Crestline. None of this involved interpretation or inference. It was declarative language in a publicly available recorded document that anyone could request from the county clerk's office for $15. Diane Pressler had been the elected president of the Millbrook Ridge HOA for 6 years when she sent me her first laminated notice. She had apparently never read page 4. I first learned Diane's name on a Thursday morning in September of 2019. I'd come over to Crestline to check on a gutter section on the north face that a tenant had reported pulling loose, and I found a laminated notice taped to the glass door of Unit 4B, the larger of my 2 commercial spaces on the ground floor. My tenant in that unit was Marcus Webb, 41 years old, who ran an upholstery and furniture repair business called Webb's Workroom out of that space. Marcus had been with me for 3 years. He paid his rent on the 1st of every month without needing a reminder, kept the interior clean and the exterior clear, and ran a quiet trade in reupholstered chairs and repaired sofas that brought customers in and out of my lot without incident. The laminated notice was on HOA letterhead with Diane's name and title printed below the signature line. It informed the occupant of Unit 4B that the window lettering on the storefront was not in compliance with the association's community aesthetic standards governing approved fonts and color palettes, and it directed the business operator to submit a signage revision application to the association's design review committee within 30 days or face escalating action. I peeled the notice off the glass, photographed it with my phone, and put it in a manila folder, which I labeled on the tab with the date and a short description. That evening, I sat down with the Harlan County Recorder's online portal and pulled the HOA covenant document. I found page 4 in about 4 minutes of reading. The following week, I wrote Diane a letter on plain stationery, stated in 2 short paragraphs that 44 Crestline Avenue was a C2 commercially zoned parcel not subject to association covenants per the explicit language of the covenants themselves, cited the parcel number and the section of the recorded document, and asked that her office confirm receipt and post no further notices to my property or my tenants. I sent it certified mail. I kept a copy stapled to a copy of her notice. 6 weeks later, a second notice arrived, also on HOA letterhead, citing a different covenant section and this time characterizing Marcus's signage as a visual nuisance, impacting the surrounding residential character. The surrounding area, if Diane had stood at the Crestline lot line and looked west, was a drainage easement and a row of white oaks. I wrote a second letter, attached a copy of the first, included 2 paragraphs from the Harlan County Zoning Code confirming the C2 designation for my parcel, and restated that no association authority had been demonstrated. Certified mail. Green card returned, signed. Both documents went in the folder. That was 4 items now, 2 from her side and 2 from mine. In January of 2020, Diane's office filed a formal nuisance complaint with the Harlan County Code Enforcement Division, alleging that commercial activity at 44 Crestline was causing measurable disruption to adjacent residential properties. A county code officer named Blaine presented himself at the building on a Tuesday afternoon, clipboard in hand and expression carefully neutral, and explained in a level voice that a formal complaint required a site inspection, regardless of its apparent merit. I told him to please come in and take his time. I walked him through every unit, the residential floors, both commercial spaces, the utility room, the mechanical areas. I showed him the maintenance log I kept for each unit, the fire suppression certificate dated 4 months prior, the egress signage in both stairwells. He found one dryer vent in Unit 7 that discharged at an angle the county code preferred to see corrected. I had it remedied within 6 days. Blaine's final report, which I obtained through a formal records request, stated that the property was in substantial compliance and that no violation related to the nuisance complaint had been substantiated. That report went into the binder. By February of 2020, the folder had grown past folder capacity, and I transferred everything into a 3-ring binder with a plastic spine and a label on the cover. Cassie, who was 11 at the time and had taken to helping me file paperwork around the house, came out to the truck with me one Saturday while I was setting it up and suggested color-coded tabs. I told her it was an excellent idea. She was right, as she usually was. The nuisance complaint itself was the 3rd incident now by my count. First notice, ignored. Second notice with a different citation, ignored. Code complaint filed with the county, investigated, found baseless. I wrote that number down in the margin of my response letter to the code report. Third, I had learned a long time ago that when someone is running a pattern against you, you want a number attached to every step. Numbers are more persuasive than adjectives. Not frequent harassment, not persistent pressure. 3 documented incidents in 4 months, with a paper record for each one. Blaine had told me during the inspection, in an offhand way, that it was unusual to see a nuisance complaint on a property this clean, and that the filing had come from an HOA address, which struck him as a mismatch given the parcel type. He did not say more than that. He did not need to. I kept his observation in my notes. That was item 4 in the binder. Through the spring and summer of 2020, I lost 2 residential tenants from the upper floors. Both were month to month, and both declined to renew within a few weeks of each other, which struck me as odd. When I sat with each of them and asked them plainly what had prompted the decision, both told me a version of the same thing. A woman had approached them separately outside the building, on the sidewalk, and introduced herself as representing the neighborhood association. She had told each of them that the building was involved in an active compliance dispute, that rezoning proceedings were likely, and that their living situation might become uncertain over the coming year. One tenant was a young woman with a toddler named Kara, who had been with me 9 months and had just signed a houseplant on her kitchen sill as though she intended to stay. The other was a retired machinist named Floyd, who had been with me for 2 years and told me he liked the south-facing windows in his unit and the quietness of the lot in the evening. Neither of them could afford the risk of instability. I lost roughly 2 months of combined rent, filling those units at a slight discount to move quickly. I asked both departing tenants to write a short account of what had been said to them and when. Both agreed without hesitation, and both signed their statements. Those statements went in the binder behind tab 5. I called Phil Nakano, my commercial real estate attorney in Roanoke, and walked him through everything from the beginning. Phil listened without interrupting until I was done. He said, "Document every step she takes. Do not push back beyond the written record. The longer she builds on a foundation she does not have, the heavier the eventual collapse." I said I understood. I went home and labeled a new tab. The fall of 2020 brought the worst escalation yet. Marcus Webb called me on a weekday evening and told me he had received a call on his personal cell number from a woman who identified herself as Diane Pressler of the Millbrook Ridge HOA. She had obtained his number from somewhere, likely the business listing online. And during that call, she told Marcus that his lease at 44 Crestline was currently under review by the association, that the building was expected to go through a rezoning process requiring the commercial units to be converted to residential use, and that he should begin looking for a new location so as not to be caught off guard. She presented it as a courtesy. Marcus asked me on that call if any of it was true. I told him clearly that it was not. I told him the HOA had zero authority over his lease or my parcel, that no rezoning filing had been made anywhere in Harlan County, and that what she had done was interference, plain and without qualification. Marcus said he knew I was right. He also told me he had a wife, 2 kids, a reputation built on repeat customers, and a business that could not survive being associated with a disputed property. He moved out in December of 2020 and found a smaller space across town at a higher rate per square foot than what I charged him. Before he left, he told me he was sorry, and that I had been a fair landlord, and that the right was on my side. I understood his decision completely. I wrote down his account of the phone call in detail, had him sign it, and filed it. I photographed Unit 4B empty from 4 angles. The binder was thick now. I started a second one. 8 documented incidents by the end of that year, each date-stamped, each in writing, each a step on a staircase Diane had been building without knowing where it ended. Then Lena died. March 2021. I will not spend more than a sentence on that because the grief is not what this story's about, though it is underneath everything in it. 6 weeks after she passed, the 4th certified letter from the HOA arrived. 4 pages. It demanded the conversion of my commercial units to residential use, a submitted exterior design revision for the entire building, and a written compliance timeline within 60 days. It cited a covenant section that applied to single-family homes inside the Millbrook Ridge plat. I was not a single-family home. I was not inside the plat. I had explained this 3 times in writing with citations. I added the letter to the binder, then sat for a while before I answered it. When I did answer it, a week later, I kept it to 1 paragraph. I cited the parcel number, the C2 designation, the recorded covenant exclusion language, and the dates of my 3 prior responses. I stated that this was the 4th time I had provided this same information, and that any further notices directed at my tenants or posted on my property without demonstrated legal authority would be addressed through the appropriate legal channels. Certified. Return receipt. Green card filed. What I did not yet know was what was driving it. Diane's husband was Glenn Pressler, and Glenn operated a commercial development company called Crestview Partners, LLC. Crestview had been assembling a land package on the north edge of the Millbrook Ridge development zone, targeting a site for an extended-stay hotel property. The financing model they were using required a minimum assembled parcel size of 2.5 acres. Glenn had the anchor parcels. He was short one. The missing piece was 44 Crestline Avenue. In early 2019, before Diane's first notice appeared on Marcus's door, Glenn had approached me through a broker contact with an offer of $480,000. The building had a conservative market value of $610,000 at that point. Given the full rehab and the stabilized rent roll, I declined briefly and thought nothing more of it. Within 6 months, the notice campaign had begun. The mechanics of the strategy, as I would eventually read in Diane's own written words, were to reduce occupancy, generate a clouded compliance history, and create a distressed sale dynamic that would support a return offer Glenn's pro forma could digest. There was a sentence in the board memo written by Diane and filed in the HOA's own shared records folder that calculated a 15 to 20% discount from stabilized value as the target outcome of sustained compliance pressure on an adjacent commercial parcel. She had put that in writing in a document associated with the board she ran and filed it. Carol Meeks found it. Carol had served as HOA board secretary for 4 years. She had voted for the original nuisance complaint in 2020 because Diane had told the board the property was within their jurisdiction and in genuine violation. She had believed that and had acted on it in good faith. In the fall of 2021, Carol had gone to the county clerk's office on her own, pulled the recorded covenant document, read page 4, and understood the full shape of what she had been part of. She found the board memo in the shared files shortly after. She called me on a Tuesday morning in November 2021. Her voice was steady. She said she had a document I needed to see and that she had made her decision before picking up the phone. I told her I would keep her name out of any proceeding to the extent the law allowed. The memo was in my email 20 minutes later. I printed 2 copies, saved them to both drives, forwarded one to Phil, and filed the original print in the binder. Phil said, "Now we have everything. File the complaint." I want to describe what that board memo said, because it is the center of what the whole campaign was. It was 3 paragraphs, dated March of 2019, written by Diane and addressed to the full board. It described the 44 Crestline parcel as an acquisition target identified by a community development partner. It described the strategy of using association compliance pressure to reduce occupancy and create what Diane called a distressed market condition in the property's income history. It contained a sentence projecting that sustained compliance activity over 18 to 24 months typically reduces adjacent commercial property value by 15 to 20% from stabilized market rate. It was professional in tone, organized in its presentation, and completely clear in its intent. Whatever Diane had told the board about the covenants and jurisdiction, she had known from March of 2019 that my parcel was not inside her authority. She had filed the nuisance complaint with Blaine's office anyway. She had called Marcus on his cell phone anyway. She had sent me 4 certified letters anyway. The memo named the motive and predated every action. Carol had printed her copy and kept it, apparently, in a folder of her own. I understood that completely. Phil drafted the civil suit in January 2022. Tortious interference with business relations, abuse of process, and unfair and deceptive trade practices under Virginia statute. Named defendants: Diane Pressler individually, Glenn Pressler and Crestview Partners LLC as co-conspirators in the depressed value scheme, and the Millbrook Ridge HOA as an entity. Before Phil filed it, we learned Diane had taken one final step. She had submitted a petition to the Harlan County Zoning Board of Appeals requesting a governance overlay that would reclassify parcels adjacent to the Millbrook Ridge plat, including 44 Crestline Avenue, as a combined residential and HOA governance zone, which would retroactively grant the association jurisdiction over my building. The hearing was set for March 14th. Phil looked at the filing and said it was either profound arrogance or cornered desperation, and that, in his experience, those two things were often indistinguishable at the end of a long scheme. We agreed to let the hearing run before filing, because a zoning board hearing produces a verbatim official record, and we wanted what was going to be said in that room on the public transcript. In the weeks before the hearing, I also made one other phone call. The building at 91 Millfield Road, a small two-story commercial property a mile from Crestline, housed the HOA's monthly board meetings in its second-floor conference room, which Porter had been renting to the association at $800 a month on a rolling annual lease for 11 years. Porter was in his mid-70s. His children had moved to Arizona. He had been managing the property remotely for several years with declining enthusiasm, and had told a mutual contact of mine that he was ready to be done with the landlord business before his next birthday. I reached Porter directly in late February. I made him a fair all-cash offer with a 30-day close and no contingencies. He accepted the same afternoon. We closed on March 3rd, 2022. I recorded the deed with the county on March 4th and filed my copy in the binder behind a fresh tab. I did not send Diane a letter. I did not call the HOA office. I did not mention to any of the parties preparing for the March 14th hearing that I had recently become the landlord of the building their board used for its monthly meetings. That information would keep. The zoning board hearing was held on a Monday evening in the county administration building. A room with folding chairs, fluorescent light, and the particular institutional patience of a venue that has absorbed 100 contested matters without ever changing its curtains. Paulette, the county zoning administrator, ran the proceedings from the dais. She had held the position for 12 years, and her expression during testimony carried the specific flatness of a person who has made a career of taking information in without signaling anything back. I arrived with Phil, a banker's box of documents, and Cassie, who had asked to come along and who settled in the gallery beside the box with her hands folded in her lap. Diane was at the petitioner's table in a red blazer and a string of pearls, her own binder open in front of her. A land use consultant named Sullivan seated to her right, who had been retained from a Roanoke planning firm to present the overlay proposal. The gallery held perhaps 30 people, a mix of HOA members and adjacent property owners who had received the required notice and wanted to understand what was being proposed for their parcels. Sullivan spoke for 20 minutes, laying out the overlay petition with the vocabulary of his trade. Neighborhood cohesion framework, aesthetic compatibility corridor, integrated governance zone, compatible land use transition buffer. He cited comparable overlay arrangements in other Virginia counties. He presented a map showing the proposed expansion of HOA authority as a clean orange shading on the zoning base map. Paulette held her pen flat on the table and watched him without taking notes. When he finished, she asked whether the petitioner had documentation demonstrating that the parcels in the proposed overlay were currently ungoverned by any applicable recorded instrument. Diane said they were. She said the adjacent commercial parcels were functionally unregulated from a community standards standpoint, and that the association had been maintaining standards over those parcels as a practical matter of necessity for the past 6 years. Paulette asked her to clarify. Was the petitioner representing to the board that the association had been exercising authority over these parcels for 6 years? Diane said yes, said it with the confidence of someone who had not been contradicted in 6 years and did not expect to start now. Phil stood. He walked to the dais and placed 4 documents in front of Paulette, side by side, in a quiet row. He did not speak until she had looked at each one. The 2008 plat map showing the Millbrook Ridge subdivision boundary and the recorded drainage easement. The 1994 county zoning certificate for parcel 44 Crestline, designating C2 commercial and mixed use. My March 2017 deed, and the 2008 HOA covenants, open to page 4, with the exclusionary language marked with a yellow tab. He said, "The petitioner's own founding document, recorded with this county in August of 2008, contains language on page 4 of the instrument expressly excluding commercially zoned parcels from association governance. The parcel at 44 Crestline Avenue has been continuously zoned C2 since 1994. The parcel has never appeared in the Millbrook Ridge plat. The drainage easement is the recorded legal boundary. The petitioner has had 0 jurisdiction over this property for the entire duration of her presidency." He let that sit for one moment. She has also been representing to county code enforcement, to this property owner's tenants, and now to this board that she has exercised that jurisdiction for 6 years. Those representations are documented. They form the basis of a civil action we will be filing with the circuit court this week. He thanked Paulette and returned to his seat. Paulette picked up the covenant document. She read the language on page 4. She set the document down with the same motion she had used to set down everything else she had handled in the last hour, without drama, without ceremony. She looked across the room at Diane. She said, "The petitioner's own recorded governing instrument forecloses the relief being requested here. The commercially zoned parcel exclusion in Section 4 of the covenants is unambiguous. No overlay is needed, because the proposed overlay would grant authority that the petitioner expressly drafted out of her own covenants 14 years ago." A pause. "The petition is denied." Sullivan was already reaching for his jacket. Diane sat very still at the petitioner's table, and for a moment her expression was the expression of someone who has just discovered, in public, that the floor they have been walking on was never there. The hearing concluded in full 17 minutes after Phil had finished speaking. 11 letters over 3 years against 1 clean parcel number and 4 lines of text on page 4. The numbers did not require commentary. In the parking lot afterward, the air was cold and smelled like wet asphalt. I put on my coat. Phil carried the banker's box. Cassie walked beside me with her hands in her pockets. Diane's white SUV, the one with the vanity plate, was still parked near the building entrance, and I saw her standing beside it talking to Sullivan in a low voice as we crossed the lot. She did not look up. I did not stop. There was nothing that needed to be said that the record had not already said better than I could. Phil filed the civil complaint the following morning. The defendant's attorney reached out within 10 days, faster than Phil had expected. And Phil said that speed was always an honest indicator of a party that has read the evidence, and concluded that a quick conversation costs less than a full trial. Preliminary negotiations ran through March and April of 2022. A settlement was reached in May. The HOA paid into a structured escrow that covered Marcus Webb's documented relocation costs, the rent differential he had absorbed at his new location for 2 years, attorney fees on both matters, and a private sum I am not at liberty to describe publicly. Marcus also received a formal written apology from the board, which his attorney had required as a term. Marcus told me he had read the letter, acknowledged it for what it was, and was ready to move forward. He is still running his shop across town, still doing good work, still paying above market rate per square foot for a space smaller than what he left. I stopped in once last winter to have a chair reupholstered, the one from Lena's reading corner in the house. It came back right. We talked for a while in the shop. Glenn Pressler's hotel project, the one that required my parcel as its anchor, lost its primary financing commitment in April 2022 when the zoning denial became part of the public record and 2 of his 3 institutional investors withdrew from the deal. The pro forma had been built on acquiring 44 Crestline at a distressed price somewhere between $480,000 and $510,000, a discount of roughly $100,000 from market that Glenn's spreadsheet had penciled in as achievable given sustained compliance pressure. The parcel was not available at any price. Crestview Partners spent the remainder of 2022 attempting to restructure the land package at a smaller footprint. They could not make the numbers work. The project was formally discontinued. In the fall of 2022, the Millbrook Ridge HOA's membership voted 214 to 61 to remove Diane Pressler from the board presidency via recall. Carol Meeks had organized the petition. Carol sent me a text that evening with a tally. I read it at the kitchen table while Cassie sat across from me working on a school assignment. I told her the vote. She looked up, nodded, looked back down. That seemed about right. The building at 91 Millfield Road. I sent the HOA a professional 3-paragraph letter in April 2022 introducing myself as their new landlord, confirming the existing lease would be honored through its June 30th term, and noting that I would not be offering renewal. I thanked them for their tenancy and wished the board well finding new accommodations. Cassie found out about the Millfield purchase about 2 weeks after the hearing, when she overheard a phone call between me and Phil, and asked me afterward to explain what the building was and why I had bought it. I told her the whole story, start to finish. She was quiet for longer than usual. Then she said, "Mom would have done that." I told her I had been thinking about her mother when I made the offer to Porter. That was true. Lena had a particular appreciation for a thing that is both correct and satisfying at the same time. She would have recognized that one. 44 Crestline Avenue stands on its corner lot. Both commercial units are occupied. The tax preparation service in 4A has been there going on 2 years. The alterations shop in 4B, where Marcus had his workroom, opened in January of 2023, and is run by a woman who hems coats and takes in curtain panels and keeps her window lettering simple. When she signed her lease, she asked me whether there was a neighborhood association she needed to know about. I told her no. Her parcel is C2. She is on solid ground. The lobby tile is still there, and it looks exactly the way Lena said it would in the morning light, which is to say it looks right. Here is what I want you to take from this before I go. And I am going to say it plainly. The day any entity sends you a compliance notice or demands authority over your property, pull your deed and pull the recorded plat. Not later that week, that day. Go to your county recorder's portal or walk into the clerk's office and request the instrument yourself. Find where your parcel's legal boundaries sit and which recorded document, if any, actually governs it. Most counties process records requests for $15 or less. Read the document yourself before you comply with anything. If an association or inspector claims jurisdiction, ask them to name the recorded instrument that establishes it and look at it yourself. If what you find says what mine said on page 4, write them a letter. State plainly that you have verified the jurisdiction question and found no basis for their claim. Send it certified and keep the signed receipt. Start the binder on the first letter, not the one that feels serious. By the time it feels serious, the early letters are the case. Answer everything in writing and keep 2 copies of every response. Log every date. 2 drives for anything digital. A documented record built from the first incident beats anger every single time, and it beats it without leaving anything for the other side to use. If you have been through something like this and have your own story, I want to hear it. Leave it in the comments and tell me how it went. If you are not subscribed yet, I would be grateful if you did, because it helps these stories reach the people who need them. Coming up next time, I want to tell you about a retired licensed surveyor in the hill country of Central Texas whose HOA president filed an adverse possession claim on a strip of his back pasture and did not know when she filed it that he had been running property boundary surveys in that county for 31 years and had already remeasured every parcel line on the block the week she submitted the paperwork. That one takes some believing. I will see you then.